The call came at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday night, exactly 12 hours before my son's wedding was supposed to begin. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping chamomile tea and reviewing the final catering headcount, when my phone buzzed. It was Jenna, the independent wedding planner my future daughter-in-law Sarah had insisted on hiring. "Hello," Christine Jenna's voice trembled slightly, lacking her usual professional polish. "Yes, Jenna." "Is there a last-minute issue with the seating chart?" I asked, keeping my voice even. It's about the guest list," Jenna stammered. "I am so sorry to be the one to tell you this. Your son and Sarah requested I call. They've canceled your invitation. They asked me to tell you not to come tomorrow." The words hung in the quiet kitchen. I didn't drop my mug. I didn't burst into tears. At 62, I had survived the loss of my husband and built a life from the ground up. A petty insult from a boy I raised and a girl who barely tolerated me wasn't going to break me. "Did they give a reason?" I inquired, adjusting my reading glasses. "Sarah's parents are paying for a photographer from New York," Jenna whispered clearly, miserable. "Sarah felt your presence might clash with the sophisticated aesthetic they want for the family portraits." I smiled. A tight, humorless smile. My son Lucas hadn't even had the spine to make the call himself. He let his bride's hired help do his dirty work. "I understand," I replied calmly. "That's fine. But tell him something for me." "Anything, Christine." "What is it?" "Tell him I own the venue, the flowers, and the catering." I paused, letting the reality sink in. "And Jenna. Since I am no longer a guest, I am no longer the host. At 6:00 a.m. tomorrow, I am canceling everything. Send the cancellation notices to Lucas and Sarah directly." Jenna gasped softly on the other end of the line. "Christine, you're serious?" "Completely," I stated, closing the catering folder on my counter. "You know my contract, Jenna. The property owner reserves the right to cancel any event without notice if the hosts violate the terms of respect and conduct. I believe being banished from my own property qualifies." Jenna didn't argue. She knew exactly what I owned because she had worked with my estate dozens of times. My husband and I bought Pine Grove Manor 30 years ago. Back then, it was just a rundown farmhouse with a massive barn and 20 acres of overgrown fields. After he passed, I poured my grief into the soil. I transformed the barn into a premier rustic elegance event space, built a massive commercial greenhouse for custom floral arrangements, and partnered with a high-end local chef to run the catering kitchen on site. I wasn't a billionaire, but I had built a highly profitable, self-sustaining ecosystem. Pine Grove was booked 2 years in advance. When Lucas proposed to Sarah, they immediately demanded to use Pine Grove. Sarah, who came from a family of doctors, constantly turned her nose up at my calloused hands and gardening boots. She viewed me as the hired help of my own estate. I had agreed to give them the venue, the food, and the flowers entirely for free, a gift worth nearly $60,000. Over the last 6 months, Sarah had taken complete control. She moved into my guest house rent-free to be closer to the planning, leaving her dirty dishes on the counter and complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. Lucas, passive and desperate to impress her family, simply nodded along. "Mom Sarah just has high standards," he would mutter whenever I calmly asked them to clean up after themselves. They mistook my quiet patience for weakness. They assumed because I wore denim and wiped dirt on my apron, I was a simple, powerless old woman. They had forgotten whose name was on the deed. I woke up at 5:00 a.m. the next morning. I didn't feel vindictive, just deeply tired of being treated like a doormat. I brewed a strong pot of coffee, poured it into my travel thermos, and walked out into the cool morning air. The estate was eerily quiet. Usually on a wedding morning, the grounds would already be buzzing with delivery trucks and staff. Not today. I walked to the main gates at the end of the long gravel driveway. I pulled the heavy iron doors shut, wrapped the thick steel chain around the bars, and clicked the heavy brass padlock into place. The satisfying snap echoed in the dawn light. Next, I walked to the commercial kitchen attached to the renovated barn. I flipped the main breaker switch, shutting down the ovens and the massive prep stations. I texted my head chef, Maria, event canceled. Take the weekend off with full pay. Do not answer any calls from Lucas or Sarah. Maria replied a minute later, understood, boss. Enjoy your weekend. I did the same for the floral team. The hundreds of white hydrangeas and imported roses Sarah had demanded would stay perfectly preserved in my temperature-controlled greenhouse. I donate them to the local nursing home on Monday. By 6:00 a.m., exactly as promised, my estate was locked down tight. No food, no flowers, no venue. I went back to my main house, packed a small overnight bag, and loaded it into my reliable Subaru. I had a small quiet cabin up in the mountains about an hour away with no internet and spotty cell service. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove out through the back service exit. As I pulled onto the highway, my phone screen lit up on the passenger seat. It was 6:45 a.m. The caller ID flashed Lucas. Their perfect day was collapsing. I didn't answer. I let it ring. It rang again and again. By the time I reached the mountain foothills, the missed call count was at 14. Mixed in were texts from Lucas, growing increasingly panicked with every passing minute. Mom, why is the main gate locked? Mom, the hair and makeup people are parked on the shoulder of the highway. They can't get in. Open the gate. Mom, answer the phone. This isn't funny. At 7:30 a.m., I finally pulled over at a scenic overlook, put the car in park, and answered the phone on the 15th ring. Where are you? Lucas shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The makeup artists are threatening to leave. Sarah is having a meltdown in the guest house. We need the keys to the main gate. Good morning, Lucas, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. I am on my way to the mountain cabin. I expect to be there by 9. The cabin, Mom, my wedding is today. You need to unlock the gates. I was informed by your wedding planner last night that my presence did not fit Sarah's aesthetic, I stated. You canceled my invitation. I accepted your decision. But since I am no longer a guest, I am not hosting this event. The venue is closed. What? He yelled. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear. You can't do that. People are flying in. The catering. Canceled, I interrupted smoothly. The chef has been given the weekend off. The greenhouse is locked. There are no flowers, no food, and no venue. I heard rustling on the other end, followed by Sarah's shrill voice in the background. Give me the phone, Christine Sarah screeched into the receiver. You open those gates right now. My parents spent $10,000 on a photographer. Then I suggest you find a very picturesque public park, I answered softly. Do not contact me again this weekend. I hung up. I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb and drove the rest of the way in peaceful silence. The mountain roads were wrapped in morning mist, matching the quiet calm settling over my chest. For months, I had ignored the warning signs. I had let Sarah criticize the paint colors in my home. I had stayed quiet when Lucas told me to stay in the main house, when Sarah's parents visited the estate, acting as if they were the true lords of the manor. I had done what mothers often do, swallowed my pride to keep the peace, hoping my son would eventually step up and defend me. But last night was the final boundary. They didn't just disrespect me. They tried to erase me from my own life's work while happily exploiting the fruits of it. When I arrived at the cabin, I unloaded my bag, chopped some firewood, and made a fresh pot of tea. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. I sat on the porch, watching the blue jays dart through the branches. Around noon, I briefly turned off the Do Not Disturb feature to check the damage. 32 missed calls. A flurry of texts. Lucas, Sarah's parents are threatening to sue you. Lucas. Please, Mom. I'm begging. Sarah won't stop crying. Lucas. We can't find a caterer. There's nowhere to go. One text stood out. It was from Jenna the planner. Jenna. Just thought you should know Sarah's dad tried to hand me a $2,000 check to cut the lock on the gate. I told him it was private property and leaving would be his best option. I resigned and drove home. Enjoy the mountains, Christine. I smiled and typed a quick reply. Thank you, Jenna. Your bonus this year will be substantial. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I had simply given them exactly what they asked for a wedding without me. By 2:06 p.m., the exact hour Sarah was supposed to be walking down the aisle, I was sitting at the small wooden desk in the cabin opening my laptop. The Wi-Fi here was slow, but sufficient for what I needed to do. It was time to address the root of the problem. Lucas had grown comfortable living in the gray area between being an independent adult and a dependent child. He worked a mid-level office job that barely covered his luxury car lease, a car he leased to keep up with Sarah's expectations. I logged into my banking portal. First, I clicked on the joint checking account I had kept open with Lucas since his college days. I regularly deposited funds in there just in case of emergencies. Over the last 6 months, I noticed those emergencies included Sarah's expensive spa days and designer shoes. With 3 clicks, I transferred my entire contribution, amounting to $15,000, back into my personal business account. I left him the $200 he had personally deposited. Next, I went to my credit card portal. Lucas was an authorized user on my Platinum card. He used it for business expenses when he helped around the farm, but he hadn't lifted a finger on the estate in a year. I clicked Deactivate Card. Finally, I opened my property management software. The guest house on the estate where Lucas and Sarah had been living, rent-free, was equipped with smart locks. I accessed the security dashboard, changed the master access code, and restricted their digital keys. I picked up my phone and sent Lucas one single text message. You and Sarah have until noon tomorrow to collect your belongings from the guest house. The smart locks will deactivate permanently at 12:01 p.m. Please leave the physical keys on the kitchen counter. I closed the laptop, feelings lighter than I had in years. The response was almost instantaneous. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Lucas. I decided to answer. Are you insane? He yelled, dropping any pretense of begging. You took the money from the account. My card got declined at the hotel we tried to book. And now you're kicking us out of our house. It is not your house, Lucas, I stated calmly, watching a squirrel scurry across the porch railing. It is my guest house, on my property. Property you barred me from. Mom, we had a fight. Okay? Families fight. You don't just make us homeless on our wedding day. We didn't have a fight, Lucas. A fight implies a two-sided argument. You and your fiancé made a calculated decision to humiliate me and exclude me while simultaneously taking my resources. I simply removed my resources. Sarah's parents are furious. Her mom had to post on Facebook that the venue canceled on us due to a plumbing disaster just to save face. I don't care about Sarah's parents' social media, I replied, sipping my tea. I care about the fact that I raised a son who watched his future wife treat his mother like a peasant and did nothing. Lucas faltered. She was just stressed about the wedding, and now she has nothing to be stressed about. Noon tomorrow, Lucas. Take whatever fits in your car. We will arrange a storage unit for the rest of your furniture next week. Mom, Where are we supposed to go? The anger in his voice suddenly shattered, replaced by the panicked tone of a little boy who had just dropped his ice cream. You are 28 years old, Lucas. You have a job. Sarah has a job. You will figure it out just like I figured it out when your father died. I ended the call. No yelling, no crying, just the cold, hard boundary of reality. I spent the evening reading a mystery novel by the fireplace. The silence of the cabin was a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding back in the city. Around 8 p.m., my iPad pinged with a notification from a family group chat I rarely checked. It was a screenshot sent by my sister Lucy. "Have you seen this?" Lucy asked. The screenshot was from Sarah's Instagram story. It was a video of her sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room, her makeup heavily smeared, wearing her expensive silk robe. Today was supposed to be the best day of my life. Sarah sniffled into the camera, but a deeply toxic family member decided to sabotage everything out of pure jealousy. We lost our venue, our food, everything. Please respect our privacy as we navigate this heartbreak. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Toxic family member. It was fascinating how quickly people weaponize therapy terms to avoid taking accountability for their own terrible behavior. She wanted sympathy, and she wanted to paint herself as a victim. Lucy called me a moment later. "Christine, what on earth is going on? Sarah's mother is calling everyone saying you had a mental breakdown and locked them out of the farm." "I didn't have a breakdown, Lucy. I had an awakening," I said mildly. I briefly explained the phone call from the wedding planner and my subsequent actions. Lucy laughed so hard she started wheezing. "You shut off the commercial coolers. That is brilliant. But you know, they're going to try and spin this to make you the villain, right? Let them," I replied, watching the fire crackle. "The people who know me know the truth. The people who believe Sarah were never my friends anyway. I control my property, my money, and my peace. They can have the internet." I slept incredibly well that night. Sunday morning, I drove back down the mountain. I arrived at Pine Grove Estate right at 11:30 a.m. The main gates were still padlocked exactly as I had left them. I parked my Subaru near the main house and walked down the stone path toward the guest cottage. Lucas's leased BMW was parked out front, the trunk popped open, stuffed to the brim with suitcases, garbage bags full of clothes and whatever kitchen appliances they could grab. Lucas was carrying a heavy cardboard box down the porch steps. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and his shirt wrinkled. He stopped when he saw me. He set the box down on the driveway. "Where is Sarah?" I asked, my voice polite but distant. "At her parents' house," Lucas muttered, staring at his shoes. "They told her to come home. They said I need to figure out my financial situation before they'll support the marriage going forward." "I see. A very practical family." Lucas finally looked up, his eyes red. "They thought you just worked here, Mom. They thought Dad left the estate to me in a trust, and you were just managing it." Sarah told them that. I felt a cold wave of realization followed immediately by disgust. "And you didn't correct them. You let them believe I was your employee." Lucas swallowed hard. It made me look good, powerful. "I'm sorry. I was stupid." "Yes, you were," I agreed calmly. "You traded your mother's dignity for the approval of people who only cared about what you could give them. You have 15 minutes until the locks change, Lucas." "Did you leave the physical keys on the counter?" He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. He wanted me to hug him. He wanted me to tell him everything would be okay, that he could unpack the car and stay. I simply nodded back. Safe travels. I turned and walked back to my home. 6 months later, the autumn leaves at Pine Grove Estate were a brilliant mix of gold and crimson. We were in the middle of our busiest wedding season. The farm was thriving. Maria the chef was preparing a massive feast for a lovely couple from Chicago, and my floral team was busy hanging late-season blooms in the main barn. The wedding between Lucas and Sarah never happened. Once Sarah's parents realized Lucas had no access to my estate, no trust fund, and an empty bank account, the relationship quickly soured. Sarah moved out of their shared apartment a month later. Lucas was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in the city. He had to trade in his leased BMW for a used sedan because he couldn't afford the luxury payments without my supplementary credit card. We still spoke, but the dynamic was entirely different. He visited on Sundays for coffee. He didn't ask for money, and he didn't bring up the estate. He was finally learning how to live as an adult, paying his own bills, cooking his own meals, and facing the consequences of his own choices. As for me, my life was lighter. I no longer tiptoed around my own property. I no longer swallowed insults to keep a fragile peace. I stood on the porch of the main house, holding a mug of chamomile tea, watching the delivery trucks roll in for the afternoon event. Jenna, the wedding planner, waved at me from across the lawn, a clipboard in her hand. I smiled and waved back. I didn't need a grand legal battle. I didn't need to scream or cry or force a dramatic reconciliation. I had simply remembered who I was, closed a gate, and let the real world do the teaching. And for the first time in a long time, my home felt entirely like my own.